The morning sun cast long shadows across the farming colony of New Eden when the first alien ships appeared in the sky. Sarah Mitchell, only 8 years old, was feeding the chickens behind her family's small house when she saw the massive black shapes blocking out the light. They moved in perfect formation, silent as death itself. The HFY Empire had come to claim another world. Sarah's parents, Marcus and Elena, ran a small farm on the outer edge of the colony. They had come to New Eden to escape the overcrowded cities of Earth, seeking a simple life among the rolling green hills and crystal-clear streams. The planet was supposed to be safe, far from any known alien territories. That morning changed everything. The first blast hit the town center, turning the market square into a crater of smoking metal and stone. Sarah watched from behind the chicken coop as people screamed and ran in all directions. The alien ships descended lower, their weapons charging with an ominous blue glow. Marcus grabbed his daughter and wife, pulling them toward the family's old transport vehicle. "We need to get to the evacuation shelters," he shouted over the sound of explosions. But as they climbed into the vehicle, another blast hit nearby, flipping their transport and throwing them all to the ground. Elena cried out in pain, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood ran down Marcus's forehead from a deep cut. Sarah sat up slowly, her ears ringing, watching as the alien ships landed in the fields around their home. The ground shook with each impact. From the nearest ship, strange creatures began to emerge. The HFY stood nearly 10 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Their skin was dark purple, covered in thick scales that could stop most human weapons. Yellow eyes glowed with cold intelligence as they surveyed their new conquest. Behind them came smaller creatures, the Vex, who served as scouts and hunters for the Empire. Sarah had seen pictures of aliens in her school books, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of these beings. They moved with deadly grace, their weapons humming with energy that could disintegrate a human in seconds. The child watched in frozen terror as they began systematically destroying everything in sight. The colony's defense force tried to fight back. Captain Rodriguez and his 20 soldiers took positions behind the concrete barriers near the landing pad. Their plasma rifles fired bright bursts of energy at the invaders, but the beams simply bounced off the HFY scales like raindrops. "Fall back!" Rodriguez screamed as his men were cut down one by one. The aliens advanced with mechanical precision, showing no emotion as they eliminated the human resistance. Within minutes, the entire defense force was destroyed. Sarah's family huddled together in the ruins of their transport. Marcus tried to carry Elena, but her injuries made movement almost impossible. The sound of alien voices grew closer, speaking in harsh, clicking tones that hurt Sarah's ears. "They're coming this way," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, you have to take Sarah and run." "I'm not leaving you," Marcus replied firmly, but Sarah could see the fear in his eyes. He knew they were trapped. The first HFY warrior appeared around the corner of their damaged vehicle. It stood motionless for a moment, studying the human family with those terrible yellow eyes. Then it raised its energy weapon, the barrel glowing brighter and brighter. Sarah closed her eyes and waited for death. But something strange happened instead. Deep inside her mind, she felt a warmth growing, spreading through her body like electricity. When she opened her eyes again, they were glowing with the same blue energy as the alien weapons. The HFY warrior stopped, its weapon lowering slightly. For the first time since landing, it showed an emotion other than cold efficiency. It stepped back, making a sound that might have been surprise or confusion. Sarah stood up slowly, not understanding what was happening to her. The warmth in her mind grew stronger, and suddenly, she could feel the alien's thoughts pressing against her consciousness. Images flashed through her awareness. Vast starships crossing the void between galaxies, entire worlds burning under HFY weapons, billions of beings enslaved or destroyed. But she sensed something else too. Fear. the warrior was afraid of her. "Sarah," Marcus called out, reaching toward his daughter. "What's happening to you?" The child turned to look at her parents, and they both gasped. Her eyes were no longer brown, but blazing blue, like tiny stars. Energy crackled around her small form, making the air itself seem to vibrate with power. The Kethvar warrior began backing away, clicking rapidly in its alien language. Other warriors appeared, drawn by their comrades' distress calls. They all stopped when they saw Sarah, their weapons raised but trembling in their clawed hands. Sarah could feel their confusion and growing terror through the strange connection in her mind. These creatures had conquered hundreds of worlds and destroyed countless civilizations. They had never encountered anything that could frighten them. Until now, the leader of the group, marked by golden band around its arms, spoke in halting English. "What are you, human child?" Sarah looked up at the towering alien, her glowing eyes meeting its yellow gaze. When she spoke, her voice carried an echo that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the physical world. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said simply, "and you need to leave my family alone." The energy around her flared brighter, and every Kethvar within 100 meters suddenly dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as if in terrible pain. Their weapons fell from nerveless claws as they writhed on the ground. Marcus and Elena stared at their daughter in shock and wonder. The little girl who had been feeding chickens that morning was gone. In her place stood something that made even the most feared warriors in the galaxy tremble with fear. But Sarah was still just 8 years old, and the power flowing through her was beyond anything she could understand or control. As the energy built to dangerous levels, cracks began appearing in the ground beneath her feet. The air itself started to shimmer and bend around her small form. The golden-banded Kethvar leader struggled to its feet, fighting against the mental pressure Sarah was unknowingly projecting. It reached for a communication device on its belt, its claws shaking as it activated an emergency signal. "Command," it gasped in its own language. "We have encountered something impossible. Request immediate backup and full battle fleet deployment. The humans have awakened something that should not exist." Sarah heard every word through her new mental connection, understanding the alien language as clearly as English. She realized that more ships were coming, bringing thousands of warriors armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. The power inside her responded to her fear and anger, growing even stronger. Lightning began arcing between her fingers, and the very fabric of space around her started to ripple and tear. "Sarah," Elena called out weakly. "Please, sweetheart, you're scaring us." The child looked at her injured mother and felt a surge of love and protectiveness that nearly overwhelmed her. The energy around her shifted, becoming gentler, but no less powerful. With a thought, she reached out and touched her mother's broken leg. Blue light flowed from Sarah's hand, and Elena gasped as her bones mended and her pain disappeared. Marcus's head wound sealed itself, leaving only clean skin behind. The child had healed them both without even thinking about how to do it. The Kethvar warriors watched this display of impossible power with growing horror. Their military doctrine had no procedures for dealing with an enemy who could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. They had come to conquer another primitive world, but instead they had found their worst nightmare. In the distance, the sound of more alien ships entering the atmosphere could be heard. Sarah looked up at the darkening sky and felt the minds of thousands of additional warriors approaching. They were bringing planet-killing weapons, determined to eliminate the threat she represented. But the little girl from Earth was no longer afraid. The power singing through her veins told her that she was capable of things these aliens had never imagined. They wanted a war. She would give them one they would never forget. As the first reinforcement ships appeared overhead, Sarah Mitchell smiled. It was not the innocent smile of a child anymore. It was the expression of something vast and terrible that had been sleeping in the depths of human potential waiting for the right moment to awaken. The HFY had made a fatal error. They had threatened the family of a human child who possessed abilities that defied the laws of physics themselves. Now, they would learn why even the oldest races in the galaxy whispered warnings about the dangerous species that called itself humanity. The reinforcement fleet descended through the clouds like a swarm of mechanical locusts. Admiral Zektar commanded the HFY battle group from his flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with enough firepower to sterilize continents. He had been pulled from his campaign against the Corellian rebels to deal with what the ground forces were calling an anomalous threat. Zektar expected to find a new human weapon, perhaps some sort of experimental technology they had stolen from a more advanced species. He did not expect to receive frantic reports about a single human child who was somehow projecting psychic energy that could cripple trained warriors. Impossible, he growled, his forearms working the command console with practiced efficiency. Humans are barely evolved primates. They have no psychic abilities whatsoever. But as his ships entered the lower atmosphere, every psychic-sensitive member of his crew began screaming in agony. The navigation officers collapsed at their stations, clutching their heads as alien thoughts invaded their minds. Even Zektar felt it, a presence pressing against his consciousness like a vast ocean of power barely contained within child's body. Down on the surface, Sarah stood in the ruins of her family's farm, her glowing eyes tracking the approaching fleet. She could feel the intentions of every alien aboard those ships. They planned to kill her, her parents, and every other human on New Eden. The thought filled her with a cold rage that made the energy around her flare even brighter. "Sarah, please," Marcus said, reaching out to touch his daughter's shoulder. "You don't have to fight them all. We can hide, find another way." The little girl turned to look at her father, and for a moment her expression softened. "They won't stop, Daddy," she said in a voice that carried strange harmonics. "They'll keep hunting us until everyone is dead. Someone has to make them understand that humans aren't prey." Elena struggled to stand on her newly healed leg, still amazed that her daughter had somehow fixed bones that had been shattered beyond repair. "But you're just 8 years old, sweetheart. This isn't your responsibility." Sarah smiled sadly, looking far older than her years. "I think I stopped being 8 years old the moment this power woke up inside me, Mommy. I can feel things now that I never felt before. I can see the threads that connect everything in the universe, and I can pull on those threads." The first wave of HFY dropships broke through the cloud layer, racing toward the farm at supersonic speeds. Their weapons were already charging, preparing to obliterate everything within a 5-mile radius. Sarah raised one small hand toward the approaching vessels. The lead dropship simply stopped in midair, its engines straining against an invisible force that held it motionless. The pilot fought desperately with his controls, but nothing responded. Behind him, 11 more ships suffered the same fate, suspended impossibly against gravity itself. On board the flagship, Admiral Zektar watched his attack force freeze in the sky and felt something he had not experienced in 3 decades of warfare: genuine fear. Analysis, he barked at his science officer. "Admiral," the officer replied, his voice shaking, "I'm reading massive gravitational distortions centered on the human settlement. The energy output is beyond our ability to measure. Whatever that child is doing, it's manipulating space-time itself." Sarah studied the trapped ships through her enhanced perception, seeing not just their physical forms, but the network of energy and matter that composed them. She could feel the terror of the aliens inside, their minds broadcasting panic across all psychic frequencies. Part of her felt sorry for them. They were soldiers following orders, not understanding that they had stumbled into something far beyond their comprehension. But another part of her, the part that pulsed with cosmic power, felt only contempt for creatures who would attack innocent families. That part wanted to show them exactly how dangerous humanity could be when properly motivated. Sarah closed her fist, and the 12 dropships crumpled like paper balls. The aliens inside had barely enough time to scream before their vessels were compressed into spheres of twisted metal no larger than basketballs. She let the ruined ships fall to Earth like strange meteors, their impact craters marking the spots where they struck. "Impressive," she said to herself, surprised by how easy it had been. "But they're just getting started." Admiral Zektar stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 12 ships, and their crews had been destroyed in seconds without any visible weapon being fired. His remaining forces were demanding new orders, but he had no idea what to tell them. His military training had never covered scenarios involving enemies who could violate the basic laws of physics. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's coming from the human settlement." "Put it through," Zektar ordered, hoping to finally get some answers. Sarah's face appeared on the main screen, looking impossibly young and innocent despite the energy crackling around her. She spoke in perfect Kethvar, her pronunciation flawless even though she had learned the language only minutes before by reading the aliens' minds. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her glowing eyes staring directly into the camera. "I'm 8 years old, and I live on this planet with my parents. You came here to hurt my family and my neighbors. I want you to leave. Now." Admiral Zektar activated his own transmitter, drawing himself up to his full imposing height. "I'm Admiral Zektar of the Kethvar Empire. You will surrender immediately, human child, or we will reduce this entire planet to molten slag. Your primitive species cannot stand against the might of our fleet." Sarah tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "You know, Admiral, I don't think you understand your situation. You're not dealing with humans. You're dealing with me, and I'm something new." Without warning, every weapon system on Zektar's flagship simply shut down. Lights flickered and died throughout the ship as Sarah reached across space itself to disable their technology. Emergency klaxons wailed as backup systems failed one by one. "This is impossible," Zektar snarled, pounding his fists on the darkened console. "How can a single child project power across space? What kind of creature are you?" "I'm learning," Sarah replied calmly. "Every second that passes, I understand more about what I can do. Would you like a demonstration?" She gestured toward the 2 cruisers flanking the flagship. Both vessels suddenly began moving toward each other despite their crews' desperate attempts to regain control. The massive ships collided with tremendous force, their hulls cracking and splitting as they were ground together like toys in the hands of an invisible giant. The surviving crew members evacuated in escape pods, watching in horror as their mighty warships were reduced to floating debris. Sarah could have killed them all, but she chose to let them live. She wanted witnesses to carry word of what had happened here. "You see, Admiral," she continued, her voice carrying clearly through the vacuum of space as if she were standing right beside him. "Your weapons can't hurt me. Your armor can't protect you from me. And your empire's vast armies mean nothing when faced with someone who can reshape reality with a thought." On the surface, Marcus and Elena watched their daughter's impossible display of power with a mixture of pride and terror. This was still their little girl, the child who collected butterfly wings and loved bedtime stories. But she was also becoming something that transcended human understanding. "Sarah," Elena called out, "you're scaring them. Maybe they'll leave now." The child turned to her mother with eyes that held depths no 8-year-old should possess. "They're not leaving, Mommy. I can feel their thoughts. They're calling for more ships, bigger weapons. They think if they bring enough force, they can win." She looked back up at the crippled fleet hanging in the sky above them. "But they don't understand. Every time they escalate, I learn something new. Every weapon they fire teaches me how to be stronger. They're not fighting a little girl anymore. They're fighting the potential of an entire species." Admiral Zektar managed to restore minimal power to his communications array. His message went out on all Imperial frequencies, marked with the highest priority codes. "This is Admiral Zektar requesting immediate deployment of the Grand Fleet. We have encountered a Class Omega threat on the world designated Sol 3 Alpha. The humans have developed some form of reality manipulation capability. Recommend immediate planetary sterilization before this threat can spread. Sarah intercepted the message easily, reading the Admiral's intentions as clearly as if he had spoken them aloud. A Class Omega threat was Imperial designation for something that could potentially destroy civilization itself. They were planning to bring their entire war fleet to glass the planet from orbit. How interesting, she mused, floating several feet off the ground as her power continued to grow. They think I'm dangerous now. Wait until they see what I can really do. In the depths of space, hundreds of HFY warships began changing course toward New Eden. The largest military force the galaxy had ever assembled was coming to eliminate a single human child. They had no idea that by gathering their strength in one place, they were about to give Sarah the perfect opportunity to end their empire forever. The little girl who had been feeding chickens that morning was gone. In her place stood something that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The HFY had awakened humanity's potential, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. But Sarah was still learning, still growing stronger with each passing moment. And deep in the cosmic forces flowing through her young body, something vast and ancient was beginning to stir. Something that had been waiting for humanity to evolve beyond its current limitations. The real war was just beginning 3 days passed before the Grand Fleet arrived. 3 days during which Sarah's power continued to grow exponentially, spreading beyond anything the HFY could have anticipated. What they didn't know was that every human on New Eden had begun a change. It started with Sarah's parents. Marcus noticed it first when he found himself understanding the alien language without any training. Elena discovered she could sense the emotions of every creature within miles. But it was old Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring farm who made the most dramatic change. She lifted a 2-ton piece of debris with her bare hands while searching for survivors in the ruined town. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her small form radiating energy that was somehow awakening dormant capabilities in every human around her. She had become a catalyst, triggering an evolutionary leap that had been lying dormant in human DNA for thousands of years. It's not just me anymore, Sarah explained to her parents as they watched other colonists discovering their new abilities. I can feel it spreading. Everyone who gets close to me starts to change. Humans have always had this potential. We just needed something to wake it up. The remaining HFY ground forces had barricaded themselves in their landing ships, too terrified to come out. Their leader, Commander Vextal, sent increasingly desperate reports to the approaching fleet. His warriors, bred and trained for conquest, were reduced to cowering children by the mere presence of the human child. The contamination is spreading, he transmitted on encrypted channels. Every human we scan shows elevated psionic readings. They're changing, evolving before our eyes. We need immediate extraction. But Admiral Zektar, commanding the massive fleet approaching New Eden, had no intention of retreat. The Grand Fleet consisted of 3,000 warships, including planet killers capable of cracking worlds apart. He had even brought the Crown vessel, the legendary flagship that housed the HFY Emperor himself. One child cannot stand against the combined might of our entire armada, Emperor HFY declared from his throne aboard the Crown vessel. We have conquered 1,000 worlds and exterminated dozens of species. These humans will burn like all the others. But as the fleet entered the outer solar system, strange things began happening. Ship after ship reported navigation failures as their instruments detected impossible gravitational anomalies. The very fabric of space around New Eden seemed to be rippling, as if reality itself was being rewritten. Sarah felt their approach long before they appeared in the sky. She stood in what remained of the town square, now transformed into something resembling a crystal garden. Her power had begun affecting the local environment, turning simple rock and metal into complex geometric structures that hummed with energy. They brought everything, she said to herself, her enhanced senses counting the approaching ships. 3,000 vessels, About 7 million soldiers. And something else. She paused, her glowing eyes focusing on something beyond physical space. There's someone important on the big ship, someone who thinks he owns the galaxy. Marcus approached his daughter cautiously. The past 3 days have been the most terrifying and amazing of his life. Sarah barely looked human anymore. She floated constantly now, her feet never touching the ground. Her hair moved as if underwater, and her skin seemed to glow from within. "Sarah, sweetheart," he said gently, "maybe we should try talking to them. Work out some kind of peace treaty." The child turned to her father with an expression of infinite sadness. "Daddy, I can read their minds across light years of space. They don't want peace. They want to own everything. They've destroyed so many worlds, killed so many people. They think that's what makes them strong." She gestured toward the sky where the first ships were becoming visible as points of light. "But they're about to learn that real strength doesn't come from guns and ships and conquer planets. It comes from protecting the people you love." The transformation spreading through the human population had accelerated dramatically. Children were levitating in their sleep. Adults were communicating telepathically across miles. Some colonists had developed the ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level, rebuilding damaged structures with a touch. Elena watched in amazement as their neighbor, 10-year-old Tommy Chun, casually bent metal beams back into shape while helping with the reconstruction efforts. "Is this what we're becoming?" she asked Sarah. "Is this what humans are meant to be?" "This is what we always were," Sarah replied. "We just forgot. The aliens out there, they stayed the same for millions of years. But humans? We're meant to grow, to change, to become something better. They're about to find out what happens when evolution meets determination." The Grand Fleet took up positions in high orbit, their massive forms blotting out stars. Emperor Kethvox himself took command of the operation, standing before banks of targeting computers that could precisely obliterate every settlement on the planet. "Begin planetary bombardment," he commanded. "Reduce every human colony to atomic dust. Leave nothing alive." 3,000 ships opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams capable of vaporizing mountains lanced down through the atmosphere toward the human settlements. It should have been the end of humanity's presence on New Eden. Instead, something impossible happened. Sarah raised both hands toward the incoming assault, and every energy beam simply stopped. Suspended in the air like frozen lightning, the deadly attacks hung motionless just feet above the planet's surface. The raw power that should have sterilized continents was held in check by the will of a single 8-year-old girl. "My turn," Sarah said quietly. She gestured upward, and every suspended energy beam reversed direction. 3,000 concentrated bursts of destructive force streaked back toward the fleet that had fired them, moving faster than the Kethvar ships could react. The smaller vessels were destroyed instantly, their hulls vaporized by their own weapons turned against them. Larger ships survived the initial impacts, but found their armor melting and their systems failing as redirected energy coursed through their structure. In minutes, half the Grand Fleet was reduced to drifting wreckage. The surviving ships' crews panicked, firing wildly in all directions as they lost all semblance of military discipline. But every shot they fired was simply absorbed and redirected back at them. Emperor Kethvox watched his invincible armada being destroyed by a human child and felt something he had never experienced before: absolute terror. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "She's just one small being. How can she have such power?" Sarah's voice reached him across the void, speaking directly into his mind with crushing clarity. "You want to know how, Emperor? It's because you never understood what you were fighting. You saw humans as weak because we showed mercy. You thought we were primitive because we helped each other instead of conquering others. You were wrong." The crown vessel shuddered as Sarah's power focused on it specifically. The massive ship, larger than most space stations, began to glow as energy built up in its hull. But instead of destroying it, Sarah did something far more terrifying. She transported herself directly onto the bridge. One moment she was standing on New Eden's surface. The next, she materialized in the center of the Crown vessel's command center, floating several feet off the deck as energy crackled around her small form. The bridge crew scattered in panic, leaving only Emperor Kethvox standing before his throne. The alien ruler was massive even by his species standards, nearly 12 feet tall with ceremonial armor that had been forged from the metals of conquered worlds. Sarah looked up at him with eyes that held the fire of stars. "Hello, Emperor. I thought it was time we met in person." Kethvox tried to draw his weapon, but found his hand frozen in place. Sarah's power held him completely immobilized, unable to move anything except his eyes and mouth. "You're wondering why I didn't just kill you from a distance," Sarah continued conversationally. "It's because I want you to understand something very important. Humans aren't like you. We don't enjoy causing pain, even to our enemies. But we will do whatever it takes to protect our families." She gestured toward the tactical display, showing the remains of the fleet. "All those ships, all those soldiers, they're not dead. I could have killed them all, but instead I disabled their vessels and transported them to a safe planet where they can think about their choices." The Emperor stared at her in disbelief. "Impossible. The energy required to transport that many beings across interstellar distances is nothing compared to what I'm becoming," Sarah finished. "Every moment that passes, I grow stronger. Every act of violence you commit makes me more powerful. Do you know why?" She floated closer to the towering alien, her small form somehow more intimidating than any weapon. "It's because power without compassion is just destruction. But when you combine unlimited ability with love for others, you get something truly dangerous. You get someone who will reshape the universe itself to keep their family safe." Kethvox felt his certainty crumbling as he stared into those impossible blue eyes. His empire had been built on the principle that might makes right, that superior force could overcome any obstacle. But this human child represented something his species had never encountered: power guided by principles rather than conquest. "What do you want?" he managed to ask. Sarah smiled, and for a moment she looked like the 8-year-old she had been just days before. "I want you to go home, Emperor. Take your ships, take your soldiers, and never threaten humans again. Because if you do," she gestured, and every remaining Kethvar vessel in the system suddenly found itself transported to the edge of their home galaxy, over 50,000 light-years away. "The next time, I won't be so gentle." As the crown vessel materialized in Kethvar space, Emperor Kethvox realized that everything his species thought they knew about warfare had just become obsolete. They had encountered something that made their vast technological superiority irrelevant, a force that operated by rules they couldn't understand or counter. But Sarah wasn't finished yet. The transformation of humanity was accelerating, and other alien species were beginning to take notice. What had started as a simple colony raid had become the opening move in a conflict that would reshape galactic civilization. And at the center of it all was a little girl who just wanted to protect her family, armed with the infinite potential of human evolution. The galaxy would never be the same. News of the Kethvar defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, every major species had received reports of the impossible, an entire grand fleet destroyed by a single human child. The reaction was swift and terrifying. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session on the neutral world of Nexus Prime. Representatives from dozens of advanced civilizations gathered to discuss what they were calling the human problem. None of them could accept that a species they had dismissed as primitive could suddenly develop such overwhelming power. Sarah felt their fear across the vastness of space. Her abilities had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. She could perceive events happening in distant star systems, sense the thoughts and emotions of beings thousands of light years away. The transformation that had begun with her was now spreading throughout human space, awakening dormant abilities in every man, woman, and child. "They're scared," she told her parents as they stood in the rebuilt town square of New Eden. The settlement had been transformed into something resembling a crystal palace. Every building restructured by human minds that could now manipulate matter at the atomic level. All the big alien governments are meeting to decide what to do about us. Marcus looked up at the night sky, which now showed aurora-like patterns created by the psychic energy radiating from the planet. What are they thinking of doing? Sarah's expression grew troubled. They want to build a containment field around Earth and all the human colonies. Lock us away where we can't contaminate the rest of the galaxy. And if that doesn't work, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena pulled her daughter close, marveling how the child could still feel so small and fragile despite wielding cosmic power. Can they do that? Elena asked. Can they really contain us? They can try, Sarah replied. They're gathering the most advanced technology from every species in the galaxy. Some kind of dimensional prison that's supposed to cut us off from normal space. But they don't understand what they're dealing with. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Veltar of the Ascended Hierarchy stood before the assembled delegates. The hierarchy was one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, their technology so advanced it seemed like magic to younger species. The human threat must be contained immediately, Veltar declared, his crystalline form pulsing with controlled energy. Our deep space monitors show that their transformation is accelerating. If allowed to continue, they could become powerful enough to reshape galactic civilization itself. Ambassador Zeklon of the Machine Collective agreed, his robotic form clicking with mechanical precision. Analysis confirms, human psionic potential exceeds all known parameters. Probability of containment success decreases by 12.7% with each solar rotation. Action must be immediate. But it was Ambassador Thrindoke of the Void Touched who voiced what everyone was thinking. Containment may not be sufficient. These humans have violated fundamental laws of reality. Perhaps sterilization would be more prudent. The chamber fell silent. Genocide was not a decision any civilization took lightly, even the coldest and most pragmatic ones. But the delegates were dealing with unprecedented fear. For millions of years, they had maintained the balance of power through superior technology and ancient wisdom. Now a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel was threatening to overthrow everything they had built. Sarah sensed their debate and felt a deep sadness wash over her. These beings were so advanced, so intelligent, yet they defaulted to violence when faced with something they couldn't control. It reminded her of schoolyard bullies who became mean when someone else proved to be better at something. But she also felt something else through her cosmic awareness: hope. Not every species was afraid of humanity's transformation. In hidden corners of the galaxy, oppressed peoples who had suffered under the current order were watching with amazement and growing courage. The Korvani, enslaved by the Kethvar Empire for centuries, whispered prayers to their ancient gods as they watched their oppressors flee in terror. The Gentle Ones, pacifists who had been forced to surrender their worlds to more aggressive species, began to dream of freedom for the first time in generations. There are others out there who need our help, Sarah realized, her perception expanding across galactic space. So many species that have been hurt by the ones making these decisions. Maybe that's why this power came to us. Not just to protect ourselves, but to protect everyone. Marcus frowned with concern. Sarah, honey, you can't save the entire galaxy. You're still just a little girl, even with all these abilities. Am I? Sarah asked, floating higher as energy began to swirl around her. I can feel every human who's changed because of me. Tom Chun can rebuild entire buildings with his mind. Mrs. Peterson can communicate with every living thing on the planet. Baby Jessica from the Miller farm started walking yesterday and left footprints that glow for hours. She gestured toward the sky where the first signs of the aliens' containment field were becoming visible as a shimmering barrier at the edge of the solar system. And there are 7 billion humans on Earth going through the same transformation. We're not just individuals anymore. We're becoming something new, something connected. They can't contain that kind of change. The containment field was indeed the most ambitious project the galaxy had ever attempted. Powered by the combined technology of every major civilization, it was designed to create a pocket dimension around human space, cutting them off from the rest of the galaxy until a permanent solution could be found. The field generators were massive structures, each one the size of a small moon. They surrounded human space at precisely calculated intervals, creating a perfect geometric pattern that would trap everything within light years of dimensional barriers. Sarah watched their construction with interest rather than fear. Her abilities had evolved beyond simple energy manipulation. She could now perceive the underlying structure of reality itself, the quantum threads that held the universe together. The alien containment field looked impressive, but it was based on principles that were fundamentally flawed. "They're trying to cage infinity," she mused to herself. How cute. On the day of activation, representatives from every major species watched as the containment field powered up. Energy readings spiked across the galaxy as dimensional barriers snapped into place around human space. For a moment, it seemed to work. Human colonies disappeared from long-range sensors as they were cut off from normal space-time. Ambassador Veltar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "It is done. The human threat has been contained. Now we can decide their ultimate fate without pressure." But his celebration was premature. Within minutes of activation, the containment field began showing stress fractures. Something inside the pocket dimension was pushing against the barriers with incredible force. On New Eden, Sarah had gathered every transformed human on the planet. They stood together in the Crystal Plaza at the heart of the settlement, their minds linked in a network that spanned continents. What the aliens saw as individual threats was actually a collective consciousness in the making. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying to every human mind simultaneously. The response was unanimous. "Yes." Sarah smiled and reached out with her enhanced perception, touching the containment field with the combined will of an entire awakened species. The barriers that had taken the resources of dozens of civilizations to create simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not overcome. They were unraveled at the quantum level, their energy converted into something that made human space itself glow with new possibilities. The field generators exploded in chain reactions across light years of space. The shock waves from their destruction knocked entire star systems off their orbital paths. In one moment, humanity had demonstrated that they could dismantle the galaxy's most advanced technology with seemingly effortless ease. On Nexus Prime, every delegate sat in stunned silence as their sensors registered the impossible. The containment field was gone, and, worse yet, human settlements were now appearing in star systems they had never occupied before. Somehow, in breaking free from the dimensional prison, they had gained the ability to move entire planets across interstellar distances. "This changes everything," Ambassador Veltar whispered. "They're not just powerful. They're beyond our understanding of what's possible." But Sarah wasn't finished demonstrating humanity's new capabilities. She had felt the thoughts and intentions of the Galactic Council during their debates. She knew they would never stop seeing humans as a threat to be eliminated. It was time to make them understand that the old rules no longer applied. With a thought, she transported herself and a small group of transformed humans directly into the council chambers on Nexus Prime. They appeared in the center of the room without triggering any of the security systems, as if space itself had simply rearranged to accommodate them. The alien delegates recoiled in terror as Sarah floated above the central platform, her young form radiating power that made their most advanced technology seem primitive by comparison. "Hello," she said politely, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "I thought it was time we had a proper conversation about the future of this galaxy." Her companions spread out around the room, each one demonstrating abilities that redefined what the assembled species thought possible. Marcus bent metal with his bare hands, while Elena communicated directly with the chamber's AI systems. Mrs. Henderson lifted the massive conference table with a gesture while 10-year-old Tommy Chun made flowers bloom from the sterile floor. "You're afraid of us," Sarah continued, addressing the stunned delegates. "You think we're dangerous because we've grown beyond your ability to control. But you're looking at this all wrong." She gestured, and suddenly every delegate could feel what she felt. The pain of enslaved species across the galaxy, the suffering of worlds strip mined for resources, the desperate hopes of beings who had given up on freedom. "We're not here to conquer you," Sarah said gently. "We're here to free everyone, including you." The transformation of galactic civilization had begun, guided by the infinite compassion and unlimited power of humanity's evolved potential. But not everyone would welcome the changes that were coming. The real conflict was just about to begin. The silence in the Galactic Council chambers stretched for what felt like eternity. Hundreds of the galaxy's most powerful beings stared at the small human girl floating before them, each one struggling to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The casual display of power that had brought humans across light years of space in an instant had shattered every assumption they held about the nature of reality itself. Ambassador Veltar of the Ascended Hierarchy was the first to speak, his crystalline form dimming with what might have been resignation. "What do you want from us, human child?" Sarah tilted her head, considering the question with the same innocent curiosity she had once shown when examining butterfly wings. "I want you to stop being afraid," she said simply. "Fear makes people do terrible things. It made you try to cage us. It makes you ignore the suffering of other species because you're worried about maintaining your power." She gestured, and suddenly the chamber was filled with holographic images. Corvani slaves working themselves to death in Kethvar mines, gentle ones watching their children starve on barren worlds, countless species ground down by the very civilizations represented in this room. "But mostly," Sarah continued, her young voice carrying infinite sadness, "I want you to remember what it feels like to hope." Without warning, every delegate in the chamber found themselves experiencing something impossible. They could feel the emotions and memories of the oppressed beings they had abandoned or exploited. The telepathic connection wasn't forced or violent. It was gentle, like Sarah herself, but utterly irresistible. Ambassador Zeklon of the Machine Collective, whose race had abandoned emotion millennia ago, suddenly felt the desperate love of a Corvani parent trying to protect their child. His mechanical form shuddered as circuits designed for pure logic were flooded with alien feelings. "This is overwhelming," he transmitted through clicks and electronic pulses. "How do biological entities function with such intense emotional input?" Sarah smiled sadly. "You learn to care about something bigger than yourself. That's what humans have always done. We feel each other's pain, and that makes us want to fix things. But not every species was ready to embrace such change." Ambassador Threndok of the Void, touched, rose from his seat, his shadow-wreathed form radiating menace. "Enough of this manipulation, child. You speak of freedom while forcing your thoughts upon us. You are no different from any other conqueror." The temperature in the chamber dropped as Threndok's species revealed why they were called the Void-Touched. Reality bent around them as they channeled dark energy from the spaces between dimensions. They were the galaxy's experts in entropy and decay, able to unmake matter at the subatomic level. "We have existed since before your son was born," Threndok continued, shadow extending like claws towards Sarah. "We have witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. You are merely the latest species to mistake power for righteousness." Sarah watched the approaching darkness with interest rather than fear. "You're really old," she acknowledged, "and really sad. All that time, all that knowledge, and you never learned the most important thing." The void energy struck her and simply stopped. Not absorbed, not deflected, but transformed into something else entirely. Where Threndok had tried to unmake her, flowers began blooming in the air itself, their petals made of crystallized starlight. "Love is stronger than entropy," Sarah explained, her power gently converting the destructive force into creative energy. Life finds a way to grow even in the darkest places. That's what makes humans different from you. We don't just survive, we make things better. Threndok staggered backward, his form flickering as millennia of certainty crumbled. The void touched had built their entire civilization on the principle that decay was the ultimate truth of existence. But this human child was proving that creation could overcome destruction without violence, that hope could exist even in the face of infinite darkness. Other delegates began to murmur among themselves as they processed what they had witnessed. Sarah had just neutralized one of the galaxy's most feared powers with what appeared to be compassion itself. The implications were staggering. Emperor Keth Vox, attending the session via quantum communication from his distant homeworld, finally broke his silence. "What you're proposing is impossible," he declared, his voice carrying across space. "The galaxy has always been ruled by strength. The powerful dominate the weak. That is natural law." "Is it?" Sarah asked, floating higher until she was level with the massive viewing screens showing the Emperor's image. "Let me show you something." With a gesture, she opened viewing portals throughout the chamber, each one displaying different parts of the galaxy in real time. But these weren't the usual images of mighty fleets and conquered worlds. Instead, they showed something unprecedented: cooperation on a galactic scale. On worlds liberated from Kethvar control, former slaves were working alongside their human liberators to rebuild devastated ecosystems. Gentle ones were sharing their agricultural knowledge with species that had oppressed them for generations. Even some Kethvar soldiers, stranded on distant planets when their fleets fled, were learning to live peacefully with the beings they had once terrorized. "Change is already happening," Sarah explained, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "Every species that humans have contacted is discovering they have more potential than they ever imagined. The Corvani can shape metal with their minds when they're not being worked to death. The Gentle Ones can accelerate plant growth when they're not struggling to survive. Even some of your own people, Emperor, are learning that cooperation feels better than conquest." The viewing portals showed more scenes. A former Kethvar commander teaching human children about star navigation while learning about Earth music in return. Ascended hierarchy crystals forming new patterns when exposed to human creativity. Machine collective units developing something resembling emotions when they worked alongside transformed humans. "This is contamination," Emperor Kethvox snarled. "You're infecting the galaxy with your primitive concepts." Sarah's expression grew stern for the first time since her arrival. "No, Emperor. We're curing the galaxy of a disease called despair. For too long, everyone has accepted that might makes right, that some beings are meant to suffer so others can prosper. That's the real infection, and it's been poisoning civilizations for millions of years." She turned to address the entire assembly, her young voice carrying with absolute authority. "I'm offering you a choice. You can continue fighting to maintain the old ways, trying to preserve systems built on fear and oppression. But you'll lose. Not because we'll conquer you, but because your own people will choose something better when they see what's possible." To demonstrate, she opened her mind fully, allowing every delegate to experience what transformed humans felt when they worked together. The sensation was indescribable. Individual consciousness expanded and connected while remaining distinct. Power shared rather than hoarded. Problems solved through collective wisdom rather than authoritarian decree. Many delegates wept, those who still had the capacity for tears. Others sat in stunned silence, as they experienced emotions their species had forgotten. Even the most cynical among them felt a stirring of something they hadn't experienced in eons: hope for a better future. "The alternative," Sarah continued gently, "is to work with us. Help us free the oppressed species. Share your knowledge and technology in building something better than any of our civilizations have achieved alone. Learn what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself." Ambassador Veltar's crystalline form brightened as he processed the implications. "You're proposing the complete restructuring of galactic civilization. The end of the dominance hierarchies that have existed since recorded history. I'm not proposing it, Sarah corrected. I'm showing you that it's already happening. The only question is whether you'll help guide the transformation or be swept aside by it. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy watched in amazement as the old order began to crumble, not through violence or conquest, but through the simple power of a better example. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves working together when they saw what cooperation could accomplish. Ancient fears dissolved when beings discovered that sharing power made everyone stronger. The HFY Empire, built on military might, found its soldiers deserting to join liberation efforts on former slave worlds. The Machine Collective discovered that emotion enhanced rather than hindered their logical processes. Even the Void-Touched began to see beauty in creation rather than finding purpose only in entropy. Not every species embraced the changes immediately. Some fought desperately to maintain the old ways, waging bitter campaigns against the expanding zones of cooperation and shared prosperity. But they were fighting against something more powerful than any weapon, the irresistible attraction of hope itself. Sarah returned to New Eden, but her consciousness now spanned the galaxy. Through the network of transformed humans and newly awakened alien allies, she could perceive and gently guide the great transformation taking place across countless worlds. Standing in the crystal gardens that had once been her family's farm, she watched ships from dozens of species arriving in peaceful procession. They came seeking not conquest or trade, but partnership in building something unprecedented, a galactic civilization based on compassion rather than competition. Are you happy with what you've started? Elena asked, still amazed by how much their daughter had changed while somehow remaining recognizably their little girl. Sarah smiled, her glowing eyes reflecting the light of distant stars where former enemies now worked as friends. I think this is what humans were always meant to do, Mommy. We were meant to show everyone else that there's always a better way. As the first truly cooperative galactic government took shape around the principles of shared power and mutual aid, Sarah Mitchell, the 8-year-old girl who had terrified an alien army, became something far more significant. The catalyst who proved that even the oldest and most entrenched systems of oppression could be transformed by the simple application of unlimited compassion backed by unlimited power. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, Sarah thought as she watched a HFY child play with a human toddler while their parents worked together to plant new gardens, was exactly as it should be. The age of human potential had begun, and with it the first real hope the galaxy had known in millions of years. Fear had been replaced by wonder, and the universe itself seemed to glow brighter as billions of beings discovered what they could accomplish when they worked together instead of against each other. In the end, what had started with one small girl protecting her family became the transformation of everything. And it all began with the simple recognition that love, not fear, was the most powerful force in the universe. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farming colony of New Eden when the first alien ships appeared in the sky. Sarah Mitchell, only 8 years old, was feeding the chickens behind her family's small house when she saw the massive black shapes blocking out the light. They moved in perfect formation, silent as death itself. The HFY Empire had come to claim another world. Sarah's parents, Marcus and Elena, ran a small farm on the outer edge of the colony. They had come to New Eden to escape the overcrowded cities of Earth, seeking a simple life among the rolling green hills and crystal-clear streams. The planet was supposed to be safe, far from any known alien territories. That morning changed everything. The first blast hit the town center, turning the market square into a crater of smoking metal and stone. Sarah watched from behind the chicken coop as people screamed and ran in all directions. The alien ships descended lower, their weapons charging with an ominous blue glow. Marcus grabbed his daughter and wife, pulling them toward the family's old transport vehicle. "We need to get to the evacuation shelters," he shouted over the sound of explosions. But As they climbed into the vehicle, another blast hit nearby, flipping their transport and throwing them all to the ground. Elena cried out in pain, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood ran down Marcus's forehead from a deep cut. Sarah sat up slowly, her ears ringing, watching as the alien ships landed in the fields around their home. The ground shook with each impact. From the nearest ship, strange creatures began to emerge. The HFY stood nearly 10 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Their skin was dark purple, covered in thick scales that could stop most human weapons. Yellow eyes glowed with cold intelligence as they surveyed their new conquest. Behind them came smaller creatures, the Vex, who served as scouts and hunters for the Empire. Sarah had seen pictures of aliens in her school books, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of these beings. They moved with deadly grace, their weapons humming with energy that could disintegrate a human in seconds. The child watched in frozen terror as they began systematically destroying everything in sight. The colony's defense force tried to fight back. Captain Rodriguez and his 20 soldiers took positions behind the concrete barriers near the landing pad. Their plasma rifles fired bright bursts of energy at the invaders, but the beams simply bounced off the HFY scales like raindrops. "Fall back!" Rodriguez screamed as his men were cut down one by one. The aliens advanced with mechanical precision, showing no emotion as they eliminated the human resistance. Within minutes, the entire defense force was destroyed. Sarah's family huddled together in the ruins of their transport. Marcus tried to carry Elena, but her injuries made movement almost impossible. The sound of alien voices grew closer, speaking in harsh, clicking tones that hurt Sarah's ears. "They're coming this way," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, you have to take Sarah and run." "I'm not leaving you," Marcus replied firmly, but Sarah could see the fear in his eyes. He knew they were trapped. The first HFY warrior appeared around the corner of their damaged vehicle. It stood motionless for a moment, studying the human family with those terrible yellow eyes. Then it raised its energy weapon, the barrel glowing brighter and brighter. Sarah closed her eyes and waited for death. But something strange happened instead. Deep inside her mind, she felt a warmth growing, spreading through her body like electricity. When she opened her eyes again, they were glowing with the same blue energy as the alien weapons. The HFY warrior stopped, its weapon lowering slightly. For the first time since landing, it showed an emotion other than cold efficiency. It stepped back, making a sound that might have been surprise or confusion. Sarah stood up slowly, not understanding what was happening to her. The warmth in her mind grew stronger, and suddenly, she could feel the alien's thoughts pressing against her consciousness. Images flashed through her awareness. Vast starships crossing the void between galaxies, entire worlds burning under HFY weapons, billions of beings enslaved or destroyed. But she sensed something else too. Fear. The warrior was afraid of her. "Sarah," Marcus called out, reaching toward his daughter. "What's happening to you?" The child turned to look at her parents, and they both gasped. Her eyes were no longer brown, but blazing blue, like tiny stars. Energy crackled around her small form, making the air itself seem to vibrate with power. The HFY warrior began backing away, clicking rapidly in its alien language. Other warriors appeared, drawn by their comrades' distress calls. They all stopped when they saw Sarah, their weapons raised, but trembling in their clawed hands. Sarah could feel their confusion and growing terror through the strange connection in her mind. These creatures had conquered hundreds of worlds and destroyed countless civilizations. They had never encountered anything that could frighten them. Until now. The leader of the group, marked by golden bands around its arms, spoke in halting English. "What are you, human child?" Sarah looked up at the towering alien, her glowing eyes meeting its yellow gaze. When she spoke, her voice carried an echo that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the physical world. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said simply, "and you need to leave my family alone." The energy around her flared brighter, and Every Kethvar within 100 meters suddenly dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as if in terrible pain. Their weapons fell from nerveless claws as they writhed on the ground. Marcus and Elena stared at their daughter in shock and wonder. The little girl who had been feeding chickens that morning was gone. In her place stood something that made even the most feared warriors in the galaxy tremble with fear. But Sarah was still just 8 years old, and the power flowing through her was beyond anything she could understand or control. As the energy built to dangerous levels, cracks began appearing in the ground beneath her feet. The air itself started to shimmer and bend around her small form. The golden-banded Kethvar leader struggled to its feet, fighting against the mental pressure Sarah was unknowingly projecting. It reached for a communication device on its belt, its claws shaking as it activated an emergency signal. Command, it gasped in its own language. We have encountered something impossible. Request immediate backup and full battle fleet deployment. The humans have awakened something that should not exist. Sarah heard every word through her new mental connection, understanding the alien language as clearly as English. She realized that more ships were coming, bringing thousands of warriors armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. The power inside her responded to her fear and anger, growing even stronger. Lightning began arcing between her fingers, and the very fabric of space around her started to ripple and tear. Sarah, Elena called out weakly. Please, sweetheart, you're scaring us. The child looked at her injured mother and felt a surge of love and protectiveness that nearly overwhelmed her. The energy around her shifted, becoming gentler, but no less powerful. With a thought, she reached out and touched her mother's broken leg. Blue light flowed from Sarah's hand, and Elena gasped as her bones mended and her pain disappeared. Marcus's head wound sealed itself, leaving only clean skin behind. The child had healed them both without even thinking about how to do it. The Kethvar warriors watched this display of impossible power with growing horror. Their military doctrine had no procedures for dealing with an enemy who could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. They had come to conquer another primitive world, but instead they had found their worst nightmare. In the distance, the sound of more alien ships entering the atmosphere could be heard. Sarah looked up at the darkening sky and felt the minds of thousands of additional warriors approaching. They were bringing planet-killing weapons, determined to eliminate the threat she represented. But the little girl from Earth was no longer afraid. The power singing through her veins told her that she was capable of things these aliens had never imagined. They wanted a war. She would give them one they would never forget. As the first reinforcement ships appeared overhead, Sarah Mitchell smiled. It was not the innocent smile of a child anymore. It was the expression of something vast and terrible that had been sleeping in the depths of human potential, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The Kethvar had made a fatal error. They had threatened the family of a human child who possessed abilities that defied the laws of physics themselves. Now they would learn why even the oldest races in the galaxy whispered warnings about the dangerous species that called itself humanity. The real battle was about to begin.